And it isn't the levies that kind of punish the use of a discretionary trust once the child turns 21. That levy is available as an exemption. Sorry, the exemption is available for that levy, so that there is the expectation that this trust will go on long term. It's also, I was saying here, predators. It's also the situation that some people will be just that little bit vulnerable to be touched for money from others. And it's those sort of people as well. There's nothing wrong, they're able to manage, but they're just that little bit not able to be, they come under the influence of the bad apple who is trying to take their money. So they're the people who really do need to be protected. And you can set up a trust for that person and make sure that that trust is not going to be subject to the levy. You have to go in under the exemption for the levies, which means that it has to be an exclusive trust for that child. And to be able to get that, as I say, the normal case is the CAT, the income tax, the CGT will apply. You are not looking at having medical expenses necessarily, so you're not going to have any exemptions. The support and maintenance exemption under Section 82 is not likely to apply, because chances are these children are well over the age of 25 already, and they're generally getting on with they're living their life. They're not totally incapacitated. So from a point of view of somebody asked during the TALC meetings over the last year, a request went in for a bit more clarification as to how revenue were going to deal with the exemption for Providence. And we had a lot of meetings in relation to it, and ultimately what came out was e-brief 92 of 2017, which is a great indicator of how revenue will treat a person who has a trust made for them where they are improvident. They basically have recognised that there is this issue, there is the need for protection. But they do want to make sure it isn't the person who has just had a bad run in Dundrum Shopping Centre. So they have to be careful in relation to it, and that's very understandable. So what they're looking for is evidence of why this child needs protection. And I've had particular cases where the person has been refused all the credit cards. They can't actually have a phone anymore, it has to be prepaid phone. They have all of their bills paid for them by drip feed. The money that's going into their ATM is basically, they clear it out every week, so therefore only a limited amount of money goes into the ATM. These people, the person I was involved with was someone who couldn't manage their phone because they kept bringing up tarot clients, putting up, they have 70 grand worth of phone bill. So this is the sort of type of thing that you're trying to protect. So the revenue recognise that. They want evidence of that. They don't want it just to be, we figure that she or he is not great with money. They want it a little bit more substantial. The difficulty is that this is individual data in relation to a person, which has to be recorded for the purposes of claiming the relief later on for the child, for instance, under the will. Because often as not, the parent is doing the drip feed to the child now, and just wants that continued by the trustees drip feeding out the money to the child so that they can manage on a controlled basis. But by giving all of this, or accumulating all of this information, bear in mind that this child has full capacity and typically will not necessarily recognise their problem, typically will be resentful of the fact that they're not receiving the inheritance where their brothers and sisters are receiving their inheritance, and their inheritance is wrapped up in a discretionary trust, and is therefore likely to put in a data request, access request for that information. So be careful as to how you draft your letters of wishes, because that child is very likely, I think Fiona is going to be talking about it later, that child is very likely to be able to access some of that information. So mind yourself in relation to those letters of wishes with personal data. So I'm moving off the special needs in the terms of the trust for the person with special needs who has diagnosed special needs or is improvident. I'm just going to the temporary special need of children that are young, and parents coming in with smallies and saying, we want to provide for our children, we want to do it in the most tax efficient manner, and we want our children fully protected. And therefore, those are sort of the criteria. And you said, okay, well listen, we can put in place what I would call a bare trust. It's basically giving the child something absolutely, and they take it at 18. And you'd say, well, you know what, that's very good on the tax efficiency, but pretty hopeless in relation to protection. Because the child gets it at 18, buys the Ferrari, and crashes it the next day, and it's all gone. So then you'd say, well, you do the other way around, you give the discretionary trust, you have a real huge amount of protection, it's very heavy on the protection. You have the trustees are going to control the money all the way along until they decide, they step into your shoes and decide which child is going to be good enough to receive their inheritance and at what age that child is going to get it. But everyone goes, well, discretionary trusts, they're very tax inefficient. There's a levy coming in at age 21, there's taxes within the trust. Are we really going to think that it is the best thing? Or what happens when the values increase? Is it not better to have given the money to the child now and let it grow with them? So why don't we even possibly do a combination? I know my kid is going to be absolutely perfect and wonderful and able to manage their money at the age of 25. My God, if no child can manage it at age 25, they might as well take it and go anyhow. I'll have done my duty. That's the sort of attitude that some parents have. Definitely not for my own kids. No. And so from that point of view, they come in and they say 25, and then you go, well, you know, there's a lot of children still at home at 25. Do you want to kick it out to 30? And then they go, gosh, yeah. So then you're sort of going, well, hang on a second. What happens to the money up till the age of 30? And then at 30, what happens if they turn out not to be that great? Or what happens if they are pretty good head on their shoulders at the age of 25? There's an inflexibility. So there's a question mark over both tax efficiency and over the protection that's there for fixed trusts. So the bare trust, as I say, is giving it to the child absolutely. They access it at 18. The tax is at the age that the parents have died. It's absolute. You have to make the decision. If there's 3 kids, they get 3 shares. Even if one child is 17 and the other is 10, and so the 10-year-old still has to be educated. And so then the question is, should you put a little bit of a pool aside to cover for education, because the other one has got more education than you. So you're getting into that sort of scenario. The discretionary trust, as I say, is great. It holds it back. But you have the difficulty of the question of the tax. Is it going to be tax efficient because it's coming only out at the end, and the values might be quite different, the thresholds might be quite different, and you've got a packet tax on the other side. You also have the levies if you don't pay them out. The fixed trust, you have to worry about whether or not you have what you're going to deal with the income. If you fix it so that the child receives it at 18 or 21 or 25, is that income going to be paid out on the child or as it goes along for the child, or are you going to accumulate that income? Even if you don't accumulate it, but you have power to accumulate, it's a discretionary trust. If you don't have the power to accumulate and you pay it out, then the income is going out to that child and they're receiving the benefit of that. And there's a very questionable case, a Jacob case, which almost requires that there's a double taxation issue in relation to the benefit that you have from the child receiving the inheritance when the parents die up to the magic age of 25. That's a fixed term benefit, and then you take the absolute benefit after. So you have question marks over that in tax terms. So then I just look back and try to see whether the perception that is there for discretionary trusts, that they're very expensive, is a correct perception to have. And I made a lot of assumptions. First of all, I assumed that I had the child receiving the inheritance, or the parents dying and the trust coming into place at the age of 13. And I'm looking forward to what happens at age if the child receives it at 21 or 25. I'm investing the inheritance at 5% consistently, and Derek will say that that's no problem if it's invested through Smith & Williamson, 5%, and if it's a later one at 10%, we're guaranteed. We put 1 million away, and I'm assuming a consistent increase in the threshold. I know that is not appropriate because it's random as to when a tax-free threshold is applied. I'm also assuming that the trust is paying out income and that there's no that it's basically going to be tax neutral in that way. And then I compared them all. And the bare trust, yes, for sure, the bare trust will end up at the age of 25 versus the discretionary trust at the age of 25. It's going to end up, the child would end up having 1.38 million from the bare trust. So definitely the bare trust is more tax efficient. And the next one that is quite tax efficient is the discretionary trust that is flexible, and then the trustees make the decision to appoint it out before the levies kick in at 21. And then that money is then invested until 25, and it comes out at 1.33 in the pocket. But then it's not that far off if you look at paying the levies, 1.26. So the discretionary trust paying the levies and receiving the money at 25, where the child might be mature at that stage to be able to deal with it, is not hugely far away from the others. But then we move on, and that was at an investment of 5%. If we change the figures and we show a 10% investment, then we look at the bare trust is actually not efficient at this stage. And the reason is that the taxes come out at the age of 13. The child has had to pay the tax at age 13, so it's only the net of tax amount that is invested. So the overall return is going to be less as it goes along, compared to the discretionary trust where you invest the money in, you invest it gross, and you get it, and you're going to get a return on it, you're getting a much better return. So it is just worthy to look at, and just don't assume that the discretionary trust is going to be the most tax efficient. So what are you going to look at? Well, my conclusion out of that is that yes, a bare trust is very useful. Definitely, if you're happy that the child is going to receive some benefits at age 18 and you're comfortable with them receiving that, get the tax-free threshold out to the child, and get out assets that you don't think are going to either have a high gain or that are not going to be producing a situation that you're going to have to sell it at a later stage. So, for instance, if it is a house that you're hoping it to be in long term, it's not going to be a realisable gain, yeah, put it out, because then it's at the lower values. But in relation to liquid assets, in relation to high return assets, put them in a discretionary trust. And then assess at age 21, and maybe at 21 the child will be able to manage, but maybe they won't. But don't just assume that, don't put it in a situation that the trustees are obliged to pay it out at 21, because even still, with the levies, it might still be worthwhile protecting the priority for the trustees, looking at a child at that point, may be that it is actually better to pay out the levies, pay the levies, and suffer the tax, because it's still not that bad. The other thing to bear in mind is at that point, it's only the youngest child at 21, so you still have older children who might have shown maturity already, and you've been able to get monies out to them. So in my scenario, we only talking about a single child receiving it, which would still have the benefit of other children being able to take their assets even at 25 if they have a younger sibling who's 20 and you still don't have levies attaching to them. So that's even more efficient for them. It's equivalent of the appointment out at 21. So that would be my recommendation in relation to trusts for young children. I'm just very conscious of time. I'm going to fly through the elderly, which is the other end of the spectrum, and protecting for them. I have a lot of oomph in the lectures in the paper in relation to it. But what I'm trying to get for you to consider is that there will be pressure, sometimes there is pressure on parents to release money to their children. But that pressure is not necessarily from the children. Sometimes it's perceived to be always from the children, but the pressure is often from the parents themselves. They feel that they need to provide for the child. It's obviously important that you listen to their concerns, but they have to be protected. You have to show that they are going to have plenty for them to live in the long term, live to their 110 and have full-time nursing care in their house because they don't want to go to the nursing home, that sort of thing. So they need to have a fair good pot of money aside before they start being very generous to their children. And that's something obviously a lot of you in the room have already had those sort of conversations with clients. But also bear in mind when you're giving monies to the child, you might be just putting good money after bad, particularly if the child is under pressure with creditors. And then if you're realising cash and you're selling things, bear in mind that sometimes you have to, if you're selling a house but you want to live in it, if you're releasing cash to be able to lend it to the child, you're going to have to take cautionary approach for your parents to make sure that they're going to have protection in relation to the monies that are going to the child and the monies that they are expecting back. I've mentioned in the notes about rights of residence and the importance of making sure that the parent who is living in the house is going to have the right to live in it. If the house is released to the child and a right of residence is retained by the parent, that's not necessarily going to be the most tax efficient if you apply the actuarial rules on based on the parent's life. So sometimes it is better to apply the revenue rule of 10% for a right of residence. But bear in mind also, if there's two parents, it's two 10%. But that will kick in as a further inheritance on their death, on each death. So you have to make sure that the child will know that there will be a tax to pay at that stage. The other thing with rights of residence is make sure that the parents are doing an EPA, because what happens if the house is to be sold? We want to make sure that it can be sold. Reversionary interest, very doable, but just as much as with rights of residence and reversionary interest, if the child is expecting to pay some money to the parent for taking the benefit of the house, it's most likely that the banks are not going to give any money to let the child borrow where the parent has the right to live in the house. So you're going to have to deal with cash children at that stage. Loans to children, be very careful to make sure that obviously if it's interest free, you have a free use issue. If the interest is paid, you're going to have income tax for the parent. Watch out for the statute of limitations. Is there an expectation that the loan will be written off on death? If so, it's still an asset in the estate. Watch out for other siblings coming in and Section 7 claims. I've done an example of if you're making a gift of a chargeable asset to a child, the CGT CAT is set up as great, but it means that the CGT is left with as a cost to the parent, not as a cost to the child. So if you have your parent in a situation they've given away the land and they still have a tax bill and they can't afford it, you can structure it to be able to get both the credit and the deduction by having a consideration being the amount that the tax is. So I'm sorry, I'm flying through this. Also bear in mind that the more complicated you get when you're dealing with anyone, but also in fairness for elderly people, you might have this wonderful scheme that is going to be the bee's knees, but it isn't necessarily going to suit your client because it might just be too complicated. And that is something that I see a lot of where children are driving this and they're trying to get the most tax efficient for everybody and the parent is going along with it, but it becomes just that bit too complicated, so just be very careful in relation to that. Don't forget covenants. If the opposite, if you're a child looking after the parent, covenants are still available, the medical expenses exemption is relevant there. Be careful about inheritances for parents, it's very rare that it happens, but the threshold is an absolute benefit taken by a parent is the Group A threshold, but a limited interest benefit is the Group B threshold. All of these trusts are not, they're commonplace for a lot of us, but they are complicated, and do bear in mind that when you're dealing with people, you have to explain to them that these trusts are going to be long-term, that you need to have good trustees. You have to trust your trustees. It sounds very obvious, but they have to be trustees that are going to be able to step in your shoes and you're going to trust them to be appropriate in relation to how they manage your money for your children. There's typically it's becoming more the case that family members will be appointed trustees, particularly because there's been such a dearth of professional trustees at this stage, although that seems to be picking up more, that there's more coming in from outside the Ireland, coming in and trying to provide professional services here. But then watch out in that situation, because Revenue will say non-resident professional trustees are going to, you will have mandatory disclosure issues and a lot more tax administration filing. Watch out for GDPR, listen to what Finian is going to say, and just be very conscious that we are, for instance, we are good at actually saying that we need to care for the elderly, we need to care for the vulnerable, but we don't actually necessarily implement it. Things like the bizarre situation of the inheritance where both parents have to die to be able to get that, it's not necessary. So we do need to keep lobbying for these things. We shouldn't be silent in relation to it. Ireland has signed we were one of the first to sign the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, but was the last to sign it, the last of the EU to sign it. They only did it the other day. There is the perception out there that trusts are these awful, evil things that from that everyone in Panama has been hiding all their money, that AML you should be all over trusts from an AML point of view. The European Parliament and most of Europe think trusts are disgraceful. We have to keep showing them that there is a good reason for trusts, that trusts are there for the purposes of protecting vulnerable people, and we shouldn't lose sight of that, and we shouldn't lose sight of it from the Irish Revenue's point of view, because there is the perception that, oh my God, it's a discretionary trust, it must mean that you're trying to avoid tax. Generally, in these sort of situations, you're trying to protect, and we just need to keep shouting about that and not hide behind a bush in relation to it. That is the purpose in relation to trusts. So I have a last quote that isn't really relevant, but just in case no one's listening, sometimes just keep shouting. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Aileen. That was, of course, fantastic and just so practical. I should say as well, we're going to have a question and answer session just before lunch, so do keep all those questions for Aileen. She will be in a position to answer them later. Our next speaker is Derek Ryan from Smith & Williamson, but before I introduce Derek, I do want to highlight Derek is getting a very important flight to Bilbao this afternoon as he has a match to attend. I think as a Munster supporter I wouldn't know anything about that, but Derek is going to be around during coffee, so if you do have any specific questions on Derek's paper, he'll be happy to chat with you during coffee. And of course his colleague George is going to be around for the afternoon as well, and equally I'm sure he can assist. Just to introduce Derek, Derek is Head of Retirement Asset Services in the Dublin office of Smith & Williamson. He's Associate of the Irish Institute of Pension Managers and a Fellow of the Pensions Management Institute in the UK. Derek is approved as a pension trustee or pensioner trustee and is experienced in structuring bespoke approved retirement schemes, and he also holds a Bachelor of Commerce degree from University College Dublin. Derek.
Thanks very much for that introduction. My mother would be proud of me after hearing all that. My God. Now, a couple of things before I start. Is it working yet? Just a few things that I want to go through. Just talk about because I've kind of have two hats here today, which you all. Obviously we're the sponsor of this event. I want to say a few words about that. I also want to say a few words about that lovely thing, GDPR. I just want to also mention a little thank you as well, and then I'm going to start with a little story in relation to what I'm going to talk about today. It's kind of unusual, and I've done this kind of not too often before, where we do sponsor events that we actually also have something that's kind of, I think quite relevant, that what we're saying, that you will hopefully get some benefit from it. But we've been sponsoring this event for a number of years. It was very interesting there when Elaine put up all the various places around the world that STEP were involved in, and a lot of you may not know this, but we were asked to sponsor the Mexico chapter, we were asked to sponsor in Kuala Lumpur, we were asked to sponsor all over the place, but there was only one chapter we wanted to sponsor, and that was Dublin. So we got the best one as far as we're concerned, and we're delighted to be associated with such a fantastic organisation as STEP. One of my directors in the UK was a founding member of STEP many, many years ago, and it's in our DNA as well. So it's lovely when you get an opportunity, a firm like us, to be associated with such a good organisation that you guys have. So I want to say that. GDPR, obviously a company like us are always trying to get business, and we drive people mad at times. So for a lot of you, you all say, oh, thank God for GDPR. They can't ring me, they can't write to me, they can't email me. But just in case there might be somebody out there, you might say, God, I'd love to talk to that fella. There's a little cardboard on the pack you got. So if you feel like contacting me, or if you just want to get the result of the Leinster game on Sunday, fill it out and we'll be able to help you. I do want to thank Tina and Grania, because they, as Grania said in her introduction there, she was ever so kind to me. I know when you put these events together, it's got to be clockwork, you've got to get it right, you've got to get the speakers in the right order and all the rest. And they facilitated me absolutely fantastically, because I do have a flight to catch in an hour or two's time. And they said, any chance I could talk in the morning, and they did it. Last night we went for a little dinner, and I only found out then, and Grania's already mentioned it, that they're both from Munster. So that was even phenomenal that they would actually even consider and let me get out, and I really do appreciate it. Thanks so much. But now to this talk and this little story I want to give you. I had a client a good few years ago, and this client was a Scottish gentleman, and he was going through a messy divorce. And in relation to his estranged wife, he kept saying a very derogatory word about her every time it came up, as sometimes this happens. And he kept calling her burned to death. Every time they talked about, he said, look, you need to organise this. He was obviously coming to me because of pensions. And every time we kind of brought up the story about, how you're going to organise your assets and all the rest, and what's happening with the pension adjustment order, he kept referring to burned to death. And I thought it was, a bit heavy, didn't really like it and all the rest, And it was only a couple of weeks later when I was filling out forms and I had to fill out the wife's name. And her name was Bernadette. And it occurred to me it was a really easy mistake to make. A really easy mistake. The heavy Scottish accent, to me, it sounded like he was saying all the time, burned to death, which I took up as being a little bit derogatory. But it's that point about making a really easy mistake that this little chat I'm going to give you today is very, very relevant. Because in relation to pensions and in relation to the people you guys are going to meet who come in as your clients, it is so easy to make a mistake in relation to the pension assets they have. I've said before that many people who come in with assets, and Aileen mentioned it as well, and they're looking to set up trusts and all the rest, and they will give you a list of what their assets are. And very, very often, the pension mightn't even be looked at. They mightn't even be thinking it is a big asset. And that's what I'd like you guys today to start thinking differently about the pension asset. And when you're getting information about what they have, that you ask the right questions. Because what happens on death is very different depending on what pension they're in. Now I know today there's people here in my profession, they see Maeve there from, in the pension industry as well, so Maeve, apologies, you know all this stuff. But it is really important, and I don't think people are catching on to it enough, because what will happen is no one will notice, your client will die, the benefit will be paid out, but with a little bit of planning, it could be paid out in such a better way. So that's the main point. That's one of the main points I want to make to you. So, conscious of time. There's all my exemptions. There we are. Okay, so we do a little introduction. I've done that to you. I want to talk about the types of pension arrangements. Where you die, okay, you know this, only two places you're going to die. You're either going to die before you retire, or you're going to die after you retire. You're not going to die anywhere else. So that's good news, okay, only two places. Where you actually die is really, really important, because that will dictate on what benefit is actually paid. And I'll show you examples on that. Hopefully you'll understand it a little bit more. So type of pension structures. I've counted 9, okay, so you can decide if there's any more than that. Personal pensions, personal retirement savings accounts, defined contribution schemes, approved retirement funds, additional voluntary contributions, small self-administered schemes, defined benefit schemes, personal retirement bonds, and annuities. That's the 9. That's the 9 I came up with. So there's 9 schemes. So when you're filling out the assets of your client, it's kind of really important you find out which pension are they in, because depending on where they die, if they die in retirement or they die before retirement, if they're in a personal pension plan versus a defined benefit scheme, the benefit is completely different. And you need to know that. Now, it's not terribly important that you know it and understand it, but you need to ask the question. Always the best thing about any advice. Who should I ask? Is there something important here? Because for some of these schemes, the value of the pension is going to be the biggest asset they have. I had a gentleman around a year and a half ago. He came in to me at around late 50s, early 60s, and he was going to receive at retirement age a pension of 45,000 per annum. The actuarial value of his benefit was coming in at around 1.4 million. He had no idea. He lived in a semi-D house worth around 500,000. He was going on about the house and how he's going to leave it. He had one child and all the rest, and it only came up in conversation, what about the pension? The pension is his biggest asset, by a shot. So that's the sort of thing I'm trying to get you to think about today. So in each of the pension structures, there can be a different rule, but we can look at a kind of a little bit of an idea how it's paid. So all you have to think about is the person going to die before you retire, after retire? You'll know actuarially most people are going to die after we retire. Thank God. Thank God. So I've tried to put this down, and it's not perfect, this screen, but it's just to give you a feel for what benefit would be paid depending on which type of pension your client is sitting in. So if you're in a personal pension plan, so if you're self-employed and you have a pension scheme, generally speaking, on death, the value of the pension would pay tax-free. So that's a nice one, nice place to be. Personal retirement savings account, exactly the same. Personal retirement bond, the fund value can be paid, but you've got to be careful with a thing called a personal retirement bond. Just in case you don't know what a personal retirement bond is, it mightn't come up on your day-to-day agenda all the time, but a personal retirement bond is where somebody works in a company for 20 years, worked in the bank, and leave the bank and go work somewhere else. Rather than leaving the benefit in the bank scheme, they can move it into a personal retirement bond, and it's a standalone asset that just sits there. They can't put any more money into it, but it means they can get access to it much early, 50 onwards. So a lot of people don't come across them, but you'll find clients often have personal retirement bonds. And the problem I have is when you meet a client and they say, oh, I have a personal pension plan, it's actually a personal retirement bond, which is a completely different animal to a personal pension plan. And the benefit can be different. But what I'm trying to say there is the value of it is paid out tax-free, but you have to be careful with them because they do come into play in calculating other retirement benefits somebody has. You must take it into account. Defined contribution scheme, anyone who's working in a company at the moment, you may be covered for 4 times salary. In the event of death, the company will pay out to your dependents 4 times salary. And then the balance has to be used to buy an annuity. And the problem with annuities, and this is where you're starting to get into the advice, is the annuity rates are really low. So for someone who's who dies young and leaves a young family, the actual amount of money being left could be a very small annuity. Aileen in her talk mentioned a word, I had never heard of that before, I must say. It was very interesting to hear about it, the improvident. I often think of myself now as an improvident every time I see that. But that's really interesting because the improvident is the sort of person, I would think, that forget about getting given a lump sum to them of maybe 800,000 or 900,000. Maybe the improvident would be better off receiving a pension. So that if you were married to somebody and they were a big spender and you felt if you were going to die, that if they were left and they were left a large amount of money, that money could be spent really, really quickly. And as a result, maybe they would be better that money was put into a pension that was paid over the person's lifetime. So all these things are so relevant, and it's so particular. One of the things we work on in Smith & Williamson is, and this is a bit of a plug I'm afraid, is that we do try and treat every single client as an individual. But in the business you guys are involved in, every single case is different. And that's why knowing what benefit they have and whether or not you can change it to suit somebody else is very, very important. Defined benefit schemes. Defined benefit schemes at the moment, just over 50 billion is sitting in them. So start doing the maths. I've mentioned this before. Apple had 13 billion that were meant to owe them, or we were paying them back, or the government was holding on to it. There was a big hullabaloo about it. 50 billion plus is sitting in defined benefit schemes, most of which the employers are dying to shut them down. If they shut them down, that cash is going to your clients. And most of your clients don't even know what it's worth. You know, myself and I mentioned Maeve earlier on, Maeve's coming across people in defined benefit schemes, and these are large benefits, and they're down as an asset, and they're saying, well, I'm only getting 20 grand or 30 grand, I'll get it at 65 years of age. But it's worth a fortune, absolute fortune. So in a defined benefit schemes, 4 times salary, anything left over then, you have a situation where you're going to have to buy an annuity. Is it good, is it bad? Additional voluntary contribution schemes return a fund. So whatever you put in, you get back. Small self-administered schemes, in effect, are the same as defined contribution schemes. You 4 times salary on date of death, anything left over must be used to pay an annuity. You'll see that's a slight problem. Small self-administered schemes are often used for owner-directors of companies. Owner-directors of companies usually don't pay themselves huge salaries. They could be getting rent from a property they own and stuff like that. What it means is, if they have £1 million in their pension pot, and they're only giving themselves 40,000 as a salary, on death 160 grand is paid out as a lump sum, and the remaining money, the majority of it, has to buy an annuity. The individual could be 55 years of age, they could have married a 25-year-old, suddenly there's very little paid out, so they need to look at it. So what are the issues arising? Low salary on date of death. That is common with owner directors. They keep the salary very low for obvious reasons. They don't want to pay tax. Low annuity rates at time of death. Currently, annuity rates are very small. If the interest rates start to rise, great, that's going to have an effect. But currently, they're small. And that means that in death, you could have a very, very low annuity being paid to the surviving spouse. 4 times salary covered under a separate policy. Now we're into trouble. Why are we into trouble? Take somebody who's in a defined contribution scheme. They've got €1 million built up. They're 58 years of age. They're 6 or 7 years off retirement. They also are in a company where the company is covering them for 4 times salary. In the event of death, they've got their 4 times, well, they haven't got anything, they're dead, but their dependents have got 4 times as a lump sum. The whole $1 million has to be used to buy an annuity. Again, what age is the surviving spouse? Will it mean a low annuity rate being used? Very low benefit. Market rates for all except defined benefit schemes. Defined benefit schemes are the only ones that have a rule that says in the event of death, you, your wife or your husband will receive, in some cases, 50% or 2/3 of what you would have received had you stayed until 65 years of age. So that could be a very nice pension. But if you're not in a defined benefit scheme, it's open market annuity rates, which could be very, very low. Dependents. Another problem. I have a few clients who have no dependents. And it's only when you sit down and you say, well, you must have a dependent. I say, no, I don't. I'm single. I have no intention of getting married. I don't have any partners. All I have is nephews and nieces, which are not dependents when it comes to pension schemes. And therefore, in the event of death, there could be no benefit paid. They may have a very large pension built up, and what will happen is any money that's in the pension could end up going back into the company. They may have sold their company to somebody else, suddenly it's gone. So there's a lot to this. It's not for you to try and say, oh, I need to understand and get my head around it. The best thing we say to you is be aware of the sort of situations you could find yourself in. Know who to ask, go to a pension provider and get some information. Retained benefits are very important. Retained benefits are pensions that an individual has with another provider from another employment. They have to be taken into account in most cases. And you need to find out what cases they need to be taken into account of. Because if the retained benefits are paid out, they're paid out as a lump sum. Any benefits from their current employment, they've already eaten up their 4 times salary, therefore we have to use the benefit as an annuity. 20% directors, the average salary is not required. Where you have a 20% director and they retire, it's a 3-year average in relation to the salary we use. So very often with 20% directors, the salary, as I said, is very low in the early years, but as they come closer to retirement, the salary often jumps up. But it may, as I said earlier on, it may not jump up in time because they could have an unfortunate event and end up moving on. Lump sum not greater than 2 times salary. If the lump sum paid is not greater than 2 times, you can pay it out. So you don't have to worry about taking into account retained benefits. It's just something to be aware of, to know. So, quick example. Mr. John Doe, I don't know how I came up with that name, fantastic. Company director, age 60. Salary, 100,000. Existing defined contribution scheme, 500,000. Personal retirement bond. This is the one where, so this guy worked in a company for 20 years, left, took his benefit, just say he worked in Bank of Ireland, took his benefit and put it into a single personal retirement bond. There's 500 grand sitting in it. He then goes and works for Ulster Bank, and he's been, for the last 20 years, he's been working for Ulster Bank, and he's got another 500,000 in his defined contribution scheme. In Ulster Bank, they're going to pay him a life cover of 4 times his salary in the event of his death. He's on 100, that's where the 400 grand comes from. Let's look what happens. Benefit on death. So he'll get his 400,000 tax-free lump sum, and he's left with the 500 and the 500, which has to buy an annuity. The annuity rate for a 60-year-old, did it a few weeks back, is 3.17. So the surviving spouse will get 400,000 and 31,750 grand for the rest of her life. So not bad. No, you know, it's hitting and ticking a lot of boxes. Not the worst. But here's another option. The same individual, instead of having the money in a personal retirement bond, had it in a personal retirement savings account. Okay? In that instance, everything looks the same. Lump sum though is 900,000. So depending on the client and what they want, would the client be better? Would the surviving spouse be better with a larger tax-free lump sum, or would they be better with a higher pension? Are they improvident, or are they not? Which suits better? That's all about good advice and knowing that if you know what somebody has and you need to get them into some other place, you can do it with planning. It's very, very hard if they haven't come into you and they've died and suddenly you have the family coming in and they give you all the information. What I'm trying to say to you is, you guys very often are in a position where somebody is going to come into you because they want to sort out their affairs. Life expectancy is short. These are the sort of questions you need to ask. If they have a pension, where do they have it? And would they like a larger lump sum, or would you like a higher annuity? And you need to organise that. That's what's important about it. So benefits paid on death post-retirement. So in the event of death, of the list of 9 I gave you, 2 of them were post-retirement, 7 of them were pre-retirement. The 2 post-retirement pension vehicles are annuities and approved retirement funds, ARFs. Annuities, what happens on death? There's usually a guaranteed period of 5-10 years. In the relation of a five-year period, that means the pension, irrespective, will be paid for the first 5 years. No lump sums are paid with an annuity. So it dies on the second death. So there's nothing passed on. If it's a single life, it dies with the individual. Single lives come in where there may be a pension scheme in place. There is a guaranteed annuity given, which is way, way and above what the market rate is offering. So therefore, when the person retires at 65, they say, well look, I can get a guaranteed annuity of 9%. I ain't going to get it anywhere. The problem is it's a single life. And in the event of death, there's no pension paid after that. So again, might be great getting 9%, but maybe they might be better looking at getting a lower one until something is passed on. And usually a percentage of the original pension, 2/3 of 50%. In relation to an approved retirement fund, an ARF, ownership, the full transfer on death is passed to spouse and to surviving children. That's the huge difference between the two. Is that important? So the annuity will give you guaranteed income for the rest of the surviving spouse's life, but there's no ownership involved in it. Where if you get somebody into an approved retirement fund, it's an asset. If it's managed properly, it can be passed on to the surviving spouse in its entirety and then on to children. People who have been at my talks will be sick of me comparing these to houses. So an annuity is like getting a house and only receiving the rent. So if you had €1 million house and you were getting 40,000 rent from it on an annual basis, the best your spouse could hope for, if it was an annuity, would be on death, the rent would drop to 20,000, and on death of the second spouse, the house would go back to the insurance company or the pension scheme. In relation to an ARF, it's like owning a €1 million house. You get the 40,000 rent. On death, the 40,000 rent keeps getting paid and the house keeps getting passed on. They're absolutely massive in difference. One comes with responsibility because you mightn't get a tenant and you have no guarantee of getting the income. You might buy a house that's not appropriate, you might get bad investment. The annuity is like having a government guarantee on the rent. So there's two very, very different things, but very important that you know the difference. So what happens on debt? Individually held asset in relation to an approved retirement fund. A grant of probate is required in most cases. It's only if the fund is less than 20,000 the grant of probate is needed. I haven't really come across ours at that level. They're always larger and they're always individually held, and you always have to get a grant of probate. No activity permitted on the ARF portfolio until the grant of probate is received. You're probably used to a lot of this stuff. Tax only notional drawdown in year of death if grant of probate is still pending. That's really common. So what happens is the client passes away, they have an ARF, they're over 60 years of age, there's a mandatory 4% drawdown that has to go out on an ARF. In the event of death, what happens is you mightn't get the grant of probate in time, so therefore what will happen is only the tax will be paid on that 4% drawdown and the money will still remain in there. So the sooner you get things organised, the better. Qualified fund manager, the QFM, is responsibility that the transfer is correct. So the revenue will always come after the QFM. That's why we be very particular on making sure that the right amount is paid to the right person. AMRF closes and transfers to ARF. Don't get too hung up on that. An approved minimum retirement fund is required when you set up an ARF. And what we're simply saying there is that it gets shut down and then gets opened up again. But don't get too worried about that one. New ARF and AMRF will pass to spouse. The area I think you guys need to look at though, and is worth looking at, is this whole area of serious ill health, because this is a hard one. We've had this awful case with the cancer that's going on at the moment in relation to the HSE. These awful cases of ladies whose life expectancy is very, very short. You may get involved in these cases. People may come in and say, look, my life expectancy now is a year, 6 months, 3 months. They want to sort out their affairs. I'm simply saying to you, ask the pension question. Do they have a pension? What type of pension is it? And what sort of benefit do they want to leave? Do they want to leave large lump sums or do they want to leave guaranteed annuities? Can we do something at this stage so that a larger amount of a lump sum can be paid? And the answer is yes. A little bit of planning, we can do it. Obviously, with serious ill health for companies, medical evidence is required. A lot of people don't realise you can take out the full value of a pension at a 10% tax where it is a case of serious ill health. So that can be really useful. So if somebody's in a defined benefit scheme, they're going to get a 40 grand pension. They're thinking 40 grand, they'll be left, they might get then a 20 grand pension for the rest of the spouse's life. They might say, well, hang on, the value of this is 1.3, 1.4 million. Sure, would I not be better getting that out? So this, you say I can get taxed at 10%.